I'm joining you right now at a steam plant, which is the source for the water for this entire campus. It's actually still a working steam plant. It's actually still in use today, and it shows us that as believers, we need to have a source for all things, right? In the Gospel of John, Jesus tells us 7 different times how he is the source of all things. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. He said, I am the light of the world. He said, I am the door to the sheep. He said, I'm the good shepherd. He said, I'm the resurrection and the life. He even said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. But today what we're going to talk about is Jesus being the true vine. The vine is the source of all growth. The vine is the source of all nourishment. And what Jesus is about to tell his disciples shortly before his death is how their ministry should look depending upon him. John chapter 15, verse 1, Jesus says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Now, throughout the Old Testament, Israel is connected to the vine. In fact, if you look back, they're always connected as a vine to the Lord, right? God is the source of all of their strength. It's even said that in the first century, if you would have walked into the temple, there was this enormous vine that adorned the front of the temple. Some even suggested that it was priced in today's world at millions of dollars. Now, whether that's true or not, it shows us that the people understood the meaning of a vine. Now, I want you to see what Jesus says. It's pretty amazing. Jesus doesn't just say, I am a vine. What Jesus says is, I am the true source of all things. I am the sufficiency of everything you need. I'm the real vine. I'm the genuine vine. And here's what he's saying. He's saying you'll be tempted to put your trust in something else. You'll be tempted to put your faith in facades. Don't do it. Now, if you study vineyards, you know that there's always a vine dresser. The vine dresser is the one who tends the vines. He takes care of them. He'll pull the weeds that get in the way. He will cut off dead branches. He will prune the tree back. He will till the ground. He's the one, get this, who will water the plants. Without the vine dresser, we have no vine. And I think when Jesus says, my Father is the gardener, he says it for us in 2 ways. Why? Because God the Father not only prunes us, but he also purges us. Now, let me just tell you about the difference in the two. When you purge, it's this idea of cleaning up the underbrush. It's this idea of taking out the weeds that get in the way of choking the plant out for growth. But when we talk about pruning, you think of it in 2 ways. When you're pruning a plant, particularly a vine, we realize that you cut off the dead wood. Now, we know about this. If you're into gardening, you know this well. And the reason you cut off the dead wood is because if you leave dead branches growing on a vine or a tree, it can breed bacteria, it can breed disease, and ultimately kill the plant, right? It will hinder the production of fruit. Reminds us of what Jesus told us about how God prunes us and disciplines us. The author of Hebrews even said in Hebrews 12, you may be familiar, when he said, do not despise the discipline of the Lord, right? God is doing this for our good. He's taking away things in our life that could hinder growth, can hinder production of fruit. But the second thing in the area of pruning is this idea of taking away living tissue. Now, this is the most painful part. You're probably wondering, why in the world would the vine dresser take apart something living? And here's why. He notices that living branches that don't have the potential to produce much fruit will actually suck the life out of the tree. And what he does is he has this idea of producing what's best, and he takes away anything that doesn't accomplish the most growth in our life. I want you to understand how God works. God severs everything in our life that is bad in order to produce fruit, much fruit, more fruit that will last. Well, how does he do this? How does God as the vine dresser do this in our life? He takes away the bugs. He takes away the diseases. He takes away anything harmful. He takes away the dead plants. He cuts back the tissue. What does that look like in your life? God will take away any selfish desire, any worldly activity that may get in the way of production of fruit in our life. He removes our bad attitudes. He removes our harmful habits, right? Many times you and I will get into the temptation and fall into the temptation of filling our life with busy schedules, right? Or a lot of activities. And activities are good in and of themselves, but if they get in the way, watch this, of our relationship with the Lord, they can be harmful. Maybe it's substance abuse. Maybe it's compulsive shopping. Maybe it's pornography. Maybe it's Maybe it's alcoholism, drug addiction. Maybe it's just sinful and selfish control of things. Maybe right now you're in a harmful relationship. Could even be working long hours at the office. Could be even laziness, slothful attitude. The gardener will do whatever he has to do to prune away anything that will get in the way of producing fruit in your life. Do you know there's a difference between pruning and disciplining? So for example, think about pruning. When you prune a tree, you're pruning it because you see potential in it. You see this tree producing tenfold, but you know there's potential to produce 20 or even 50-fold, and so you prune it. The other side is disciplining. And the reason God will discipline our lives as believers is because we have things in our life that are sinful, things in our life that are harmful. And what God sees is there is something that will ruin his name or disgrace our testimony, and he does anything he has to do to remove it. Now, I want you to know, both of them are equally painful, but they're for a different purpose. And here's what Jesus says. I love how he finishes this section, verse 7. In verse 7, Jesus says, "If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you." And the key term there is the word abide. It's this idea of dwelling or remaining. It's allowing God to take up residence in your life. He wants to spend time with you. He wants to be our friend, right? He wants to walk with us and talk with us. He wants us to listen to him. Abiding and prayer go together. If you think about it, the more you abide, the more you desire to pray. And the more you pray, the more you want to abide, and you abide with God. And you think about it, Jesus is the only man on the planet who did not have to spend time in prayer. The eternal Son of God, if anybody didn't have to spend time in prayer, it was Jesus, but he did. Think about it. 45 different scriptures talk about 30 different occasions, 30 different occurrences or events in Jesus' life where he prayed. And if we think about Jesus' life, the busier he got, the more he prayed. But sadly for us, the busier our lives get, and I know my life is like this, sometimes the less we pray. I want to take you into the day in the life of Jesus, and it's in the beginning of his ministry. He has a few of his disciples following him. They go to Capernaum, and Jesus is going to preach in the synagogue that day, and it's a memorable service, and you'll know in just a moment. After he preaches the service there that day, a man stands up in the middle of the service and yells out, "Jesus, we know who you are, Son of David." And Jesus is caught off guard in a sense by this man and says to him, "Get out of him," talking to the demon. The demon comes out. It's a memorable service, to say the least. Jesus goes back home to Peter's mother-in-law's house. And Peter basically says, "Jesus, since you're healing people, why don't we heal my mother-in-law? She's sick in the bed with a fever." Jesus walks over, picks her up by the hand. She gets up and he heals her. And then it says that the whole town comes out. They're knocking on the door. This is a very busy day in the life of Jesus' ministry. And it says Jesus heals people late into the night. He doesn't get a shepherd's rest after service like some of us pastors like to have. He works into the night. And I want to show you what happens in verse 35, Mark 1:35. Here's what it says. "And rising very late in the day, Jesus sleeps in and takes a siesta." Is that what it says? No, it doesn't say that. Notice what it says. "And rising very early in the morning, Jesus gets up, goes to a desolate place, and there he prays." And then Peter comes to meet Jesus. Think about this. And he says, "Jesus, the whole town is waiting for you. They've set up the platform ready for you to preach. The worship team has already played. The news reporters are there. The television crews are set up. Jesus, let's go speak to them." And an American pastor, think about it, we would go speak to the crowd. But Jesus says, "No, let us go to the next town, because that's why I was sent here." Now here's the question. How does Jesus come up with a plan that is countercultural to what we would do? And I think the reason is he spent time in prayer. That's my challenge to us as we close. I want to challenge you. Make time for God in prayer. Do you know God is a God who wants to be with us? God wants to be with you. He wants to spend time with you. He wants to abide in you, and he wants you to abide in him. If you think about creation, God through Moses spends 2 chapters in Genesis on the creation of the world. But then he devotes 13 chapters to the tabernacle. Now, why is that important? Because God is interested in our relationship with him, right? He's a coming down God. God came down to be with Adam. They walked in the cool of the garden. God came down to Moses to give him the commandments on Mount Sinai. God came down to the Israelites. He led them with a pillar of fire by night and a cloud of smoke by day. God came down in the incarnation of his Son, Jesus Christ. And think about this. In the end, Revelation 21:1, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth has passed away, and the sea was no longer. And I saw the holy city, a new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And here's what John said. And I heard a voice from the throne of heaven saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with men. Watch this. He will dwell with them. You know what he's saying there? He will abide with them. He will spend time with them. He will be their God. They will be his people. He himself will be their God. Robbie, why are we spending so much time talking about God being with us? Here's the challenge in our culture. Many Christians are trying to get out of the world to go to heaven, while God is trying to break in the world in our life, right? We're trying to get out, God's trying to break in. Now, how do we allow God to break in our life? When we walk holy lives, when we live upright before the Lord, when we're a blessing to other people, we're bringing the kingdom of heaven today. I mean, think about the Lord's Prayer. When Jesus said, pray this way, your kingdom come, your will be done. Do you know those two are synonymous? That the way we bring the kingdom of heaven to earth is to do the will of God. See, when we do the will of God, we bring heaven here. This is not passive acceptance. This is active affirmation. This is active participation. Here's what we're saying. We say, Jesus, you take charge of my life. Jesus, you break in. You take charge of my heart. You take charge of my church. You take charge of my life. So let me ask you a couple personal questions. What areas of your life need to be rearranged to make time for God? What do you need to do in order to increase or decrease things in your life to spend time with Jesus? Or a question I want to ask you is one I've asked myself. Robbie, do you need to rise early in the morning like Jesus did to get alone with God to hear from him? So let me ask you, is that you? And in order to do that, what do you have to do in order to make time for it?